Do you remember those home videos from back in the day? You know, when every special moment of your life was recorded on a video camera before smartphones existed? Well, I certainly remember them. My mom used to own a video camera, and she recorded some videos when me and my sister were very young. One of them was when we were going to the zoo. I was a toddler at the time and slept for the majority of the visit. My mom, dad, and sister were seeing all the animals while my mom was recording our special moment together. These memories are made to last forever, but there was one tape that I saw that led me to an inconvenient truth. It was late fall of 2019, and I was living in a second-floor apartment with my grandma. The holidays were approaching, and my grandma was preparing for them. My sister came over to take my grandma shopping to buy food for our traditional holiday meals, along with dessert and some other things that we needed for the apartment, like cleaning supplies or other essentials. Before they left, my grandma told my sister to go into the closet in her bedroom and get something. So my sister went into my grandma's bedroom, straight to the closet, and got whatever she wanted. I suddenly heard my sister struggling, as it was something pretty heavy that she had. I then started to hear dragging coming from whatever it was. She then came out of the room, dragging a big box with her foot into the living room. The box was labeled Holiday Movies in a red-colored Sharpie, and it was sealed with packaging tape. My grandma then peeled the tape off and gave the used tape to my sister to discard. She then opened the box, and there were a bunch of VHS tapes inside. It was a mix of store-bought tapes and ones that were taped on the TV. Then my grandma told me to go through the box and pick out some movies to watch while she and my sister were going out. I nodded in compliance with the task. My grandma told me that she'd be back in a little while, as I then hugged them goodbye. They put their masks on, got their stuff, and headed out the door. I then started to go through the box of tapes to see what movies I wanted to watch. There were more taped ones than I thought there were, and mostly they were from the 90s. As I got down to the bottom of the box, there was one tape that didn't have a cover box on it. I gently pulled it out of the box and looked at the label. It said, Christmas Party 2015, and was written in black Sharpie. I was confused at that point because I didn't remember going to a Christmas party with my family or friends back then, but I decided that it was something that I really needed to see because it was a home video that had special moments inside of it. I turned on the TV and changed the input to the VCR input. I then started up the VCR and inserted the tape into it. The video started. It was me at my dad's house, and it didn't have the time and date shown like usual home videos. To top it all off, it wasn't of home video quality either. It had the quality of a modern-day TV show, and it wasn't from the point of view of me holding a camera. It was more like an episode that was filmed. It was around late afternoon, and the sun was still out. I was standing in the living room at the front door, probably waiting for someone to pick me up and bring me to this so-called party. I was wearing my usual winter attire, but no hat or scarf because I don't like wearing them. There was some snow on the ground, but I decided to wear my periwinkle Converse knockoff shoes instead of boots. Suddenly, a van pulled up and parked at the front of my house. The van looked like it was made in the 70s and looked more like a minivan mixed with an SUV, and it also seemed that there were two other people in it as well. I went out the door and locked the inside door behind me. When I got to the van, the person sitting there opened the sliding door for me. Beyond my belief, it was Billy Bevel from the 1998 CGI children's cartoon Roly Poly Oly, and his friend Oly Poly and his little brother Binky were also there. They were in the same CGI animated form as in the show and were wearing full winter attire, despite being robots. Furthermore, Oly's sister Zoe wasn't there either. I was completely stunned by this. They greeted me as I got into the van and were very excited to see me. Billy then told me that I was the best babysitter he, Oly, and Binky ever had. Babysitter? I thought. I sat in the back with Binky. Billy and Oli were sitting in the individual seats in the middle. The driver turned around and asked me and everyone else if we were all set. It was a male driver. He was a big, mildly obese man, had no facial hair, but had short black and grey thick hair. Looked a bit like Rodney Dangerfield, mixed with Jonathan Goldstein from Drake and Josh, and seemed like he was in his late 40s or early 50s. He also looked a bit creepy, but seemed like a nice guy. Furthermore, he wasn't wearing winter clothes. He was dressed as if it was springtime, and the style looked 80s or 90s. "Yep, we're all set," Billy and Oli said as I nodded, and Binky responded in his usual cute baby talk in unison. "Okay, and off we go," the man said as he shifted the gear to drive and began to drive off. As he was driving, I asked him what his name was. Oddly, he whispered something that I couldn't make out, and neither did Billy, Oli, or Binky, which confused us, but we let it go. "You guys want to listen to some Christmas music?" he asked us. "Yeah." Me, Billy, and Oli cheered as Binky used baby talk once again. "All right, let's get some Christmas music on," the guy said, as he then turned on the radio and music began to play. It was "Christmas Time Is Here, Have Yourself a Merry Christmas" by the band New Song, and we all started singing along to it. The trip was about 30 to 45 minutes long. We kept singing along to other Christmas songs that played on the radio the whole trip until we finally reached our destination. The driver pulled up in the driveway at a strange house. It was a nice house, but by the looks of it, it was pretty much abandoned as the windows were boarded up. Also, it seemed that the house had a fire at some point as well. It was a bit awkward to have a party at a place like that. The four of us started to get chills, but we stayed strong. We all got out of the vehicle and walked to the front of the house and up the steps. The man then took out a key, inserted it into the lock, and opened the door. As we went in, we couldn't believe our eyes. The interior of the house was completely intact and had no sign of decay. The entrance led straight into the living room and had a small amount of Christmas decorations. No one else was here either, so we thought that it was just a small get-together Christmas party. It was very warm inside, and we started to sweat a little. Then, we started smelling something that was delectable and cheesy. So, we went over to the side of the living room, and a black folding table was sitting there. On the table, it had a pizza box, red paper plates, and napkins on it. I opened the box, and a round party-sized pizza with half pepperoni and half plain cheese was sitting there and was hot and fresh out of the oven. We were admiring how good the pizza looked, and we were starving too. So we took off our mittens, coats, scarves, and winter hats and kept our boots and shoes on. Oli and Binky looked very festive underneath their winter attire. Oli was wearing a red, fuzzy, ugly Christmas sweater with big white polka dots, short green stripes on the neck and sleeves, and had a cute reindeer on it. He also had green, round-shaped boots with ridges on the soles of the boots. Binky was also wearing a red Christmas sweater, but it was a fuzzy, yarn-ribbed fold turtleneck sweater with red, white, and green pom-poms on it, and a cute, smiling snowman with a black top hat on his head, and his stick arms were up in the air. He looked very adorable in it. Billy and I didn't really dress that festively, but Billy did wear a fuzzy, yarn-ribbed fold turtleneck sweater. It was a light, moderate blue color, and he was also wearing pale blue jeans with a brown belt and square-shaped boots that also had ridges on the soles of the boots. He also kept his winter hat on, which was a Matisse-ribbed cuff-short beanie cap, which was a shade of blue and had no pom-pom on top. I just wore regular clothes, which were a medium light blue V-neck tie, front long-sleeve cover-up shirt with a frill at the end of the sleeves, and black polyester flare pants. We then grabbed our own plates and took what we wanted. I only took cheese because I didn't like pepperoni. The guy then brought out red plastic cups and drinks. There was soda and fruit punch in big bottles, and he poured one of each into a cup. I hated soda because of the carbonation in it, but at least there was an alternative if someone didn't like it. After he did that, He went into the kitchen to get some things and brought out a radio with a CD player built into it and some Christmas music CDs. He placed it on the table, plugged it in, and turned it on. There was loud static coming from it. The static sounded a bit eerie, as it had a slightly scary sound to it, kind of like a banshee or an evil entity. The guy switched the input to the CD input, and it went completely silent. The man then gave us a choice of which CD we wanted to listen to first. We chose a CD with all the classic Christmas songs sung by famous people like Burl Ives. He put the disc in the player and pressed play, and then the music eventually began to play. The song Jingle Bell Rock was playing, and we started dancing and singing to it. The boys were having too much fun dancing, but they were holding their drinks in their hands. Oli accidentally bumped into Billy, which caused him to lose hold of his cup, and the drink spilled all over the rug. The man looked over to see what had happened and saw the spilled drink on the floor. He then started to get extremely angry, and his face was very red. We all trembled in fear at the sight of him. "Are you fucking kidding me right now?" he yelled in a loud, distorted-like voice. His teeth were clenched, and he was growling while hyperventilating. The four of us gasped in shock at what we had just witnessed, and we were very mortified by it. The man then realized his mistake and stopped what he was doing. It's okay. I'll clean it up." He said it in a calmer, more patient tone. We couldn't believe what happened at this moment in time. Something wasn't right about him at all. He then went over to the table to get some napkins. We slowly backed away from him, so we didn't get in his way. The man then began to clean up the mess that was accidentally made, as we still stood there in disbelief, watching him. The party lasted for about 3 to 4 hours into the tape. We were having lots of fun despite what happened. We played games, ate more pizza, had lots of Christmas candy, did more dancing and singing, and even chatted with each other. I did some Christmas finger painting with Binky, and we had fun together. I drew a cute snowman with lots of snowflakes. Binky just did a handprint. He wanted me to put my handprint on it too, so I did. After that, he signed his name on it with red paint and gave it to me to keep for memories. He was such a sweet robot baby boy. Oli and Billy were gulping down soda and competed against each other to see who could burp the loudest. And afterwards, they burped Christmas songs together as we laughed our asses off. That was the best part of the whole party, but unfortunately, it was now time to go home. We were saddened by that, because we didn't want the party to end yet, but things like parties don't last forever. As we were putting our coats, scarves, mittens, and hats back on, the guy was taking down the rest of the decorations and putting them away. Suddenly, a cell phone rang, and it was the guy's phone that was ringing. "I have to take this," he said, as he took out his smartphone. He quickly went into the kitchen with the rest of the decorations as well. Suddenly, we heard a very hard door slam in the distance, which made us jump in fear. We didn't go see who he was talking to, because we didn't want to make him angry. So, we stayed in the living room and waited. About 4 minutes later, we heard a door open, and the guy came out of the kitchen. He told us that we had to get going right now. Before we headed out the door, we smelled something burning. Billy turned around to see where the smell was coming from. Immediately, his face turned into a complete shock as he gasped. He saw black smoke coming from the kitchen. We were mortified by the sight of the smoke. "Excuse me, there's smoke coming from the kitchen," Billy said worriedly as he informed the guy. "We need to go now," the guy said in a serious tone. "But there's smoke," Billy said, still worried. "Let's go," the guy yelled. Billy trembled in fear as he had a blank expression on his face. We were terrified by this as well. He seemed to not care about the smoke and was more worried about leaving. "Okay," Billy said in fear, as he was still frightened by the man. We then went out the door, and the guy told us to get in the van immediately, as he violently slammed the front door and locked it, which made us all jump and tremble in fear again. It was now nighttime, and it was much colder outside. We shivered, and our teeth were chattering from the cold as we got into the warm van. We then put our seatbelts on and sat as we waited for the guy to come. He then got in the van and started it up. "Do you want Christmas music on or not?" he asked in an annoyed tone. We nodded yes, as we were still quite scared of him. The man then turned on the radio, and Landslide by Fleetwood Mac was playing. We didn't sing along to the song as we weren't in a cheerful mood at the moment and kept quiet. He then shifted the gear and began to drive off. It was about 20 to 25 minutes into the drive as we were on the highway. The boys and I were singing along to "Everything's Gonna Be Cool This Christmas" by the Eels. As we were having fun, I noticed that the man missed the turn for the exit. I was told earlier that I was getting dropped off first, so I informed him that he had forgotten to turn to the exit, but he said absolutely nothing and kept on driving. We all looked at each other in confusion. Billy then informed him that he had missed the turn for the exit to my hometown. He completely ignored him too. Suddenly, a phone started ringing, and this time, it was Billy's phone that was ringing. He took out his smartphone, and it was his mom, Benita, that was calling. He then picked it up and greeted her, but she was in distress. She told him that we missed the party and that everyone was waiting for us. Billy was confused by this statement. He then told his mum that we were just getting back from the party and that we were on our way home. She asked him what he meant by just getting back from the party. He told her a guy in an old school van picked us all up and brought us to the party at a house. Benita then said that a female relative of mine was supposed to pick us all up and that the party was at Knights of Columbus, not at a house. We all faced the guy driving. He slowly gave us an evil grin as he was still driving. We started to tremble in fear once again, and as Benita was saying something else, the phone cut off. Billy then looked at his phone as it immediately shut itself down despite having a high battery percentage. Billy gulped in fear as he had a blank expression on his face, and so did the rest of us. The man then turned left on the highway and was heading towards a highway tunnel. The vehicle went down the road ramp and entered the tunnel. As we were going through the tunnel, it was starting to get unusually hotter than it did in the van, and we began to sweat like crazy and hyperventilate. The music became distorted and slow as the driver started to drive faster. At the near end of the tunnel, we saw an orange light, and as we looked closer, we realized that the light was actually fire. We started to panic at this point. "What's the matter? Aren't you guys having fun?" the guy said in an evil tone. "Who are you?" we screamed. The guy turned around and revealed his true identity. "I'm Lemuel," he said, as his voice quickly turned demonic. The music suddenly changed to heavy metal and was no longer distorted Christmas music. Lemuel began to laugh evilly. Lemuel looked like a black, hideous gargoyle with razor-sharp teeth, had 2 horns on top of his head, had big, scary wings, a slightly muscular body, and had yellow eyes. We all screamed at the sight of this unholy monstrosity as he continued to laugh maniacally. The 4 of us attempted to unbuckle our seatbelts, but they wouldn't unbuckle. Then Oli and Billy tried to open the van doors, but they wouldn't budge, as if they were jammed. Lemuel then stepped on the gas brake, and the vehicle went unbelievably fast. We all slammed back into our seats by the force of the speed. We got closer and closer to the portal of hell, and Binky began to cry and wobble in fear. I got closer to Binky and held him tight. The vehicle was almost near hell as Lemuel continued his evil laugh. The 4 of us let out a long scream as we were approaching hell. Suddenly, the entire view was engulfed in flames, and the scream turned into a blood-curdling scream as Lemuel laughed once more. The tape abruptly stopped there and went back to the blue screen. I immediately ejected the tape from the VCR and threw it across the hall from the kitchen. The tape hit the front door and broke into pieces. I then ran into the kitchen and started texting my grandma, telling her what had just happened. She texted me back and told me that she and my sister were on their way back. About 30 minutes later, My grandma and my sister came through the door with the groceries as I was standing there, completely stunned. My grandma asked me what happened. I told her the whole story as I showed her the tape that was broken on the floor. She couldn't believe what I told her. She then threatened to inform the authorities, but I told her that they would be no help with this. I decided that I would do some research on it instead. We agreed, and she and my sister started putting away the groceries. Later on during the night, I went onto my tablet and began researching this alleged tape, but ended up empty-handed as there was no information on it whatsoever. So, I decided to take it up with the experts and contacted one through email on a website. Days went by, and I didn't get a reply until one very day that I finally did. I was going to Gmail to check on any new emails, and I got a reply from a guy who was an expert on the paranormal. What he said really shocked me. He told me that the mysterious tape that seemed like a home video was actually a dream tape. He gave me a description of what dream tapes were, so here it goes. Dream tapes, dream films, or nightmare tapes are a legendary phenomenon in which an individual's dreams, bad ones, are taken, whether it be a past dream or a dream that is yet to come, and put into a home media device such as DVD, film reel, or more commonly, VHS, and can disguise itself as a home video or a movie. This occurrence dates back to the early 20th century, when home media was at its beginning and wasn't very common due to high costs. This occurrence can happen to people of all ages. The dream tapes, which were called dream films at the time, were very obscure, and the majority of these went unreported for unknown reasons. The earliest occurrence was reported in June 1909 in Ireland, where a 3-year-old boy witnessed one while cleaning his room and found a film reel that was under his bed in perfect shape. It was a dream film about him and his family having fun on a trip when it suddenly turned dark as his parents mysteriously vanished without a trace, and he couldn't find them anywhere. Everyone was refusing to help him as they were very rude to him and told him off. Since nobody cared, he began to cry, and the film abruptly ended there. He became traumatized after watching it, and for the rest of his life, he suffered from mental illnesses and was never the same again until his death decades later. Others reported witnessing the films appearing in front of them or in other places in their house, which contained more nightmarish dreams that were more disturbing or so bizarre that they were hard to explain. Some people even committed suicide. For years, experts have been researching this, and it is possible that these occurrences could be linked to the paranormal in some way or an evil entity of some kind. Nobody knows why it happens, but there has to be a reason behind it. Since these occurrences are more common nowadays, it would be a lot easier to analyze, but people tend to destroy them afterwards, so experts can't dig deeper into it. He then told me that the next time I come across another dream tape, to not destroy the evidence and report it, so experts like him can analyze the subject further. It was a lot to read, but it was worth the time. I showed my grandma the email I got from the guy, and she was completely dumbfounded by what she read. She didn't think that something like that would exist, and neither did I. As time went by, I started to keep an eye out for any dream tapes I may come across, or any dreams I might come across in my sleep. Furthermore, my family pitched in as well as our community to spread the word about it.
And to this very day, I still haven't run into any more dream tapes or had that same dream from the tape.
The first time you meet your girlfriend's family is extremely important. Maybe they will become your family too. You have to be funny and charming, but not too funny or too charming that it seems unnatural. You don't want to be a faker or bootlicker. When I was about to meet Mabel's family, I couldn't stop feeling anxious. At 25, I had dated a lot, and I knew she was the woman of my dreams. She was beautiful, successful, and sweet, the most supportive and generous person I've ever met in my life. We had been together for a little over 2 years, and I felt so at ease with her. All the time it was like we could be our true selves to each other. Her parents, younger sister, and older brother all used to live in another country, so we still didn't get the chance to meet. We talked over Skype and FaceTime a few times, and they at least seemed to not dislike me. But you know it's not the same thing. They were already at Mabel's spacious modern house in the suburbia when I arrived on Christmas Eve. I cursed myself for not being the first one there, but no one seemed to mind. "Hi, Jonah." Her father, Richard, opened the door for me, enthusiastically shook my hand, then decided it wasn't enough and half-hugged me, patting me in the back. "Such a businessman. Don't worry, Mabel told us you had to work today." His warmness both shocked me and relieved me. For a man in his 50s, I assume, he was incredibly handsome. Richard had auburn hair like Mabel and was tall and fit. He guided me to the other family members in the living room. "Martha, Bernie, Fred, this is the famous Jonah. Looks even better in person, am I right?" He strongly patted me in the back again. "Look how good you look in this suit." Martha, Mabel's mother, was overjoyed to see me and landed 2 kisses in my cheeks. She didn't look one day older than 35, and, just like her daughter, she smelled good. After hugging me, she screamed to the general direction of the kitchen, "This one is a keeper, Mab." Next was the little sister. Bernie was around 15, blonde, and with a face that looked carved on white marble like her mother. She rolled her eyes with a smile, a sign that she thought her parents were too much, but in an affectionate way, and extended her hand. "Nice to meet you, Jonah. I hope you enjoy yourself today." Last but not least was Fred. He was one of the best-looking men I have ever met. Richard and Martha complimented me, and I know I look all right, but compared to him, I'm more akin to a trash bag. He was tall and strong, both in the arms and the legs. His trousers and button-up shirt looked amazing on him, fitting perfectly like he was an Armani model. His hair was shiny and his teeth perfectly aligned. I'm not ashamed to say that if I wasn't exclusively into chicks, I would fall for him. None of them looked this good in video, but I dismissed it as the quality of the frontal camera Dodge's webcam. That explains why they complimented me. I was probably fucking ugly on our calls. "Please have a sit, son." Richard pointed me to a chair. "Mabel will change and will be here in a second." The 5 of us had a great time talking, shifting between lots of entertaining topics and getting to know each other better. Every single one of them was interesting, and I honestly couldn't wait for them to become my family. Sure, I love my parents, but they are so normal. Around 20 minutes after I started socializing with them, Mabel came downstairs. She was stunning. Her makeup was perfectly done. Her hair looked like rubies. Her dress was like the wind, and her face was sweeter and prettier than ever. I was truly wonderstruck and regretted that, for a second after meeting her family, I thought that she was the least gorgeous person of her kin. I couldn't hold back anymore. I got on my knees in reverence, then straightened myself and proposed. I'd been carrying the ring in my pocket for a while, waiting to do it sometime shortly after I met her parents. Well, it was a little quicker than expected. Everyone in the room erupted in screams of joy. Mabel emphatically said yes a few times and held me tightly. After a few seconds, the others joined us in the hug. It was the perfect Christmas with a perfect family. I'm so glad our family is complete now. Richard's eyes were full of happy tears, and he squeezed my face between his hands, then kissed my left cheek. My mouth was covered by my older brother's hand, shallow, panicked breaths escaping between the sweat between the cracks of his fingers. "So please, let's eat," Bernie asked in a typical impatient teenager tone, but with a note of joy. The tidbits I had earlier were not enough. "Sure, sweetie. Jonah, let's go to the dinner table. The boys will get the main dish." Martha guided me to another room. The table was long, filled with side dishes and perfectly set. Richard and Fred soon entered the dinner room with an immense plate filled with a roasted human. I thought my eyes were deceiving me, but nothing else could have this size and shape. "It looks delicious as always, sis." Bernie was happier now than before. "Is this?" I babbled. "A human," Mabel responded, like it was the most natural thing in the world, like it was merely a turkey. "It actually tastes great roasted if you know how to adjust the oven temperature." "And boy, does she know," Fred added with a smile, starting to cut the meat. The seasoning is amazing too. Upon a better look, I noticed the body belonged to a young male. Bernie greedily ate her first bite, and instantly her beauty and youth became uncanny, almost unbearable. It was like she was glowing with an otherworldly light. "Come on, son," Richard gave me a fatherly look. "We're beautiful, rich, smart, and successful. Who would ever get that without a little ritual here and there?" "We only need to make it once a year. It's a great cost benefit," Martha remarked, as she served herself with potatoes and one of the feet. When she noticed I was staring at her dish, she explained with a smile, "I just love to nibble on the bones. And it don't have to be a female virgin. This would be so boring and old. As long as the person is young and beautiful, we can make do. This is some frat guy who tried to force himself on my friend," Bernie explained. "Well, not on my watch." All their explanations made me consider it all extremely reasonable. "Don't you love me?" Mabel batted her lashes, knowing very well I loved her more than anything. "Don't you want to become almost perfect like us?" "We know damn well a couple that performs rituals together stays together, son," Richard said with a charming wink. "Me and Martha have been together for 40 years, it's guaranteed." As I made up my mind, I didn't answer. I just cut myself a slice of the leg and decided to partake. Staring at the tree, whiskey in hand, Pete was pleased that this year would be different from the last. It had been the strangest time of his life, but he truly felt like things were finally coming together, and when better to come together than at Christmas? A time he loved more than any other. In some ways, the past year had been like an eternity, in others as if it had succumbed to time in the blink of an eye, but either way he was glad to see the back of it. Staring at the Christmas tree, its beautiful lights casting a warm hue over the room, and the snow quietly falling outside as the sun set, Pete began to think of the past year, of his daughter Lana, and his wife Janet. It had started with a very normal December 12 months earlier. The small town in which they lived was covered in a thick layer of snow, the residents spending most of their days clearing driveways, and Pete's wife going off for one of her usual wanders. She had been gone for a couple of hours, but while Janet was utterly devoted to her family, she still needed moments to herself, to clear her head, to diminish the stress that comes with a loving yet disorganized husband, and a little girl who was kind, but whom enjoyed trying her parents' patience as much as possible. When the tensions of a domestic life clouded her feelings, or began to weigh on her spirits, Janet would wander out of the back door into the fields and woodlands which characterized the entire area, and trek for a little while through the pines which dotted the landscape. It therefore wasn't unusual for her to be gone for fairly long periods, especially since it was around that time of year when she would take it upon herself to choose the Christmas tree. No matter how much Pete or Lana asked to help out, this was Janet's job. She loved the tradition of it, the process of choosing the best possible tree, cutting it down, and then seeing the bright smiles on her family's faces as they would gleefully take the tree indoors and decorate it with sparkling glitter garlands, warm, glowing lights, and an array of festive baubles. It was a small highland town where they lived, far away from any major city, but Janet and the rest of her family loved their home. The simplicity of it, the feeling of being an integral part of a close-knit community, and of course the beautiful surroundings, lush during the Scottish summer and cold, crisp, stark, but yet awe-inspiring in the winter. Most importantly, she loved the pine woods nearby, specifically a collection of trees which sat at the top of a small hill within walking distance from the house, perfect for picking a Christmas tree. She would return there each year, and while their numbers thinned due to a few other neighbors going there for the exact same purpose, there were enough trees to last a good many years. When she had been gone for 3 hours, Pete began to grow nervous, as this was longer than usual, and since it was getting dark, he took it upon himself to venture outside, telling Lana to lock the doors after him, and that he would not be long. Lana laughed when he told her that he expected that Mummy was struggling through the snow with a huge tree, bigger than any other they had ever had. Pete loved to see the excitement in his daughter's face at this time of year, and he told her to watch from her bedroom window to see what they would bring back. With this, she excitedly ran up the stairs straight to her window before he had to call her back down to lock the door. Gazing at the beautiful tree, he could remember that night like it was yesterday. The snow was crisp on the ground and crunched under his feet as it began to freeze. Small flakes fell from the sky occasionally, but Janet's footprints remained uncovered. Even without them, Pete knew where they were heading. The hill where Janet returned each year was only a 40-minute hike away. She would pick a pine tree from there. In fact, sometimes she picked two. One around 6 foot, the other a young tree about half the size if they could find one suitable. It was difficult at times to find smaller trees as they seemed to be rare in that area. Everyone in the town seemed to like the idea of having a small tree in their children's bedrooms, so people would climb up there with an axe and take what they wanted, so there weren't as many at hand. Lana at one time had thought it was sad to cut down and kill the trees just for people to look at, but Pete explained to her about tradition and that he was sure more would grow back. With time, she forgot this protest and looked forward to the years when she could have one. If a smaller tree couldn't be found, they had a lovely synthetic one which would sit at her window. Secretly, she loved this just as much, but as her father had said, tradition is tradition. The larger tree would be placed in the living room and adorned with an assortment of baubles, glittering decorations, and lights. The other, in Lana's room, would be sprayed with a can of fake snow and covered in hanging candy sticks and chocolates, although she was always told she could only have one a day before bed as a treat. Of course, occasionally she would break this rule and just hope no one would notice. Janet could always tell, but she would let it go. Christmas time was the best of times after all, and it was so brief. As Pete approached the hill, he knew something was wrong. He felt it in his bones. As he climbed, the snow began to fall in greater volume, and the sky dimmed with it. Standing at the humble summit, a stillness spread. Silence interrupted momentarily by the almost audible patter of snowflakes floating gently to the ground. He followed the footprints now with purpose, knowing that if the snowfall increased, that it would be nearly impossible to find Janet. Twilight fell, covering everything in a dark blue wisp of color, as the frost began to nip at his now rosy cheeks. The footprints bobbed and weaved their way through the huge pines, finally stopping next to a wonderfully thick and vibrant tree, one which was perfectly suited for their purposes. The perfect size, almost 7 foot tall, a deep life-filled green, and a thick abundance of branches and pines, which made it almost impossible to visually penetrate its cover in such a light. But yet Janet was nowhere to be seen, and as far as Pete could tell, there were no other tracks in the snow leading away in any direction. She had most certainly been here, but where had she gone? This was both puzzling and worrying. It seemed impossible, but there they were, Janet's last 2 footprints engraved in the ground, but the snow all around, virgin, undisturbed, and lacking all signs of life. It was as if she had just vanished into the night. Looking at the base of the tree, Pete ran his fingers over a deep gash in its trunk. There was no doubt about it. Janet had taken a few swipes at it with her axe. Then, for some unknown reason, she had left, or perhaps moved on to a tree she felt was more suitable. Surely not, though. This tree was perfect. That must have been it, though. She must have moved on. Perhaps there was some random, freakish flurry of snow which covered her tracks. Yes, that must have been it. But Pete knew this was wishful thinking. He had lived there for years, and in all of that time he had never seen such a thing. Then he saw it. Several meters away, lying in the snow, was Janet's axe. He rushed over to the object, falling once as the snow deepened. Rising to his feet, it was now unmistakable. Yes, it was partially covered in snow, but it was Janet's axe, all right. It lay there much like the footprints, isolated but with the absence of any human imprints. It was as if the tool had been dropped from a great height, but Pete did not care to speculate. A sense of growing worry permeated his mind as the thought of Janet lying somewhere injured increased his anxiety. Shouting his wife's name repeatedly drew no reply as darkness now began to creep ever closer. If she was hurt, he would have to raise the alarm and get the town out looking for her, along with mountain rescue. She wouldn't survive long in the snow and that biting cold. At this thought, the panic grew. Worry, fear, hurt that can only be felt through love. With torch in hand, he continued in the direction the axe had taken him. As he entered a thick den of pine trees, he noticed the broken branches littered on the ground, as if something had rushed past, tearing them apart and breaking them off on impact. Maybe Janet ran through here. The scale of the damage, however, looked too great to have been dealt by one person alone. Had he been in any other country, he would have assumed a bear was nearby, but they had been hunted to extinction in Scotland long ago, along with the wolves and any other predators. For a moment his torch reflected off of something scuttling under a bush, but it looked more like an insect than anything else, and again far too small to cause such devastation. Pete fixed his scarf, trying to cover his face as the frost bit deeper, but just as he did so, something caught his eye, something on the ground. Shining his torch on what he at first thought to be a dead animal was the crumpled body of Janet lying still on the ground. A heart attack, they said. A heart attack. But Pete had seen her face. He had looked upon those eyes once so filled with kindness, transfixed in a frozen stare. Cold, glassy, black with fear. Her hands were clenched in front of her, and the pathologist told him that this was perfectly normal for one suffering such a massive heart attack in such low temperatures, as was the contorted look on her face. Although at the mention of this, Pete saw a flicker in the pathologist's eyes which gave away that he was as puzzled by that look as anyone. A look Pete would never forget. Darling Janet, love of his life, mother of his children, dying alone in the cold, with lips pulled back over teeth in agony, frozen into an inhuman sneer. The whole ordeal had devastated him. If it hadn't been for their daughter Lana, for the necessity of her needs to be met before his own, Pete would have found it nearly impossible to have gotten through it. The past 12 months had been cluttered with reminders of an aching loss. As with any bereavement, the first time of doing something once shared without that person made the pain more acute. The first Christmas, the first day at work, the first walk to school, the first family get-together. Every person's face etched in concern, accompanied by the usual well-meaning but empty traditions of, "How are you holding up?" It must have been so difficult, and if there's anything I can do. Helping his daughter through the loss of her mother was all he had to make sure he could face another day. But that stopped now. They had been through the horror, through the denial, through the silent meals, through the lonely cries of despair at night, through the birthdays empty and somber. They had been through it all. All these firsts were over. It had been over 12 months since Janet's death, and Pete felt almost exhilarated by this. He still missed her every day. The pain would never truly leave him, but the feeling of accomplishment, of strength, something which he thought had deserted him that he had endured, filled him for the first time with thoughts of the future. Thoughts that life does indeed go on, even when our dearest have gone before us. And what of his beautiful daughter? Dear, kind Lana. He may have felt compelled to bring her through the past year, but her empathy and strength had left him in awe. Characteristics which someone so young had no right to possess, but which were thankfully present nonetheless. When she had cried, he had been there, and on more than one occasion when he lay sobbing, staring at that empty void of space in his double bed at night, Lana would waken and climb in beside him, and they would both cry together until they fell asleep. She was his rock, and by God, she was going to have the best Christmas she'd ever had. Pete had made a number of arrangements. He had spent a fortune on every gift imaginable. He had filled the house with every food and treat that she enjoyed, and both Janet's parents and his own were flying in for Christmas dinner to be with their brave, sweet little granddaughter. He'd also organized for Lana's friends to have a sleepover on Boxing Day, which she had pleaded for, but Pete always knew he would give in eventually. She never asked for much, but this year, this Christmas, she would have more than she could imagine. The house was perfect, but there was one thing left to do. One thing that Pete had dreamt of since the night he found Janet's body. She had chosen that tree. It was going to be sitting in their living room, adorned with all manner of decorations. That was its purpose, its very reason for being. Janet never finished cutting the damn thing down. It was in many ways her dying act, and Pete was going to make sure that it was fulfilled. On the anniversary of her death, he wandered through the snow, winding his way through the pines until he stood at the foot of that ominous little hill. The sun shone brightly, and it wasn't as cold as it had been the night Janet died, but each footstep was accompanied by a sickness in the pit of Pete's stomach. Each stride a morbid reminder of the previous year, and that terrible heartbreak in the snow. Marching to its peak, he first walked to, and observed the scene of Janet's untimely death. Standing there where her body had laid, Pete wiped the tears from his eyes and placed a small Santa figurine on the ground, burying it in the snow. It had always been hung from the branches of each yearly tree and was her favorite decoration. It seemed only right that it be with her. After another few minutes of trudging, there it was. It was still standing. That damned tree. As if ravenous for revenge, Pete pulled Janet's axe from his backpack and charged at the pine. He battered and chopped at the cut which Janet had made the previous year, making it deeper with every slice, with every pound of pressure he could muster. The tree groaned and creaked as if in pain, but Pete did not care. This tree was the final reminder of Janet's death. Whatever had happened that night, it happened because of that tree. As crazy as it seemed, it all made sense for a moment, and then clarity was clouded by mundane reality. She had simply died of natural causes. With the roar of cracked wood breaking under its own weight, the tree swooned and collapsed to the ground in defeat. Tying a rope around its trunk, and then using string to fold its branches inward, Pete dragged that memory, that cold-hearted pillar of nature's brutality, through the snow, over grass and gravel, and finally to his back door. He was victorious. With little thought for carpet or furniture, he dragged it up the stairs into the house and placed it in front of the window in the living room, wedging it upright into an old wooden stump they had used as a stand every year. Breathless and covered in sweat, he stood back looking at the tree standing tall over all it surveyed. "You picked a good one, love. You picked a good one." He held back the tears and waited for Lana to return home from her friends. Pete put an old Christmas film on the television as they both decorated the tree together, singing, laughing, and being a family. There were moments, fleeting glances when they caught one another's stare, a glance which showed pain buried deep down inside, one which said, "I miss her too." But it was Christmas, and the moments of grief passed, buffered by longer, caring periods of happiness. Contentment caressed smiles from ear to ear, and festive spirit once more filled that home, which had for too long been host to loss and anguish. As night began to fall after Lana went to bed, earlier than usual because the excitement had worn her out, Pete decided to reward himself for the day's efforts. The lights were dimmed, and after pouring himself a large whiskey, he sat on the living room couch and stared at the tree. Draped in tinsel garlands and adorned with bright white Christmas lights, it really was a sight to behold. The best tree they had ever had. "Here's to you, gorgeous," Pete said, lifting his drink to the sky in a symbolic gesture. Staring at the Christmas tree, its beautiful lights casting a warm hue over the room, and the snow quietly falling outside as the sun set, Pete began to think of the past year, of his daughter Lana and his wife Janet. Time passed slowly as he thought of all things gone, how they had led to this moment through pain and suffering, but now hopefully onwards to the future, and one filled with at least the briefest possibility of joy. The glow from the tree reflected off of the window, but it penetrated far enough to illuminate the now thick blur of snow, falling to the ground silently outside. The room remained dark, but the lights bathed everything subtly in a warm Yuletide radiance, which, when accompanied by the orange lambency of the fire, only served to cultivate the anticipation for Christmas even more so. For the first time in a year, Pete was happy. Something bothered him, though. There was a slight apprehension or annoyance at the back of his mind, something which was spoiling the display. Sipping at his whiskey, casting a glance at the entire room, he finally saw what the problem was. Two of the Christmas tree lights were occasionally flickering, not constantly, but often enough to be noticeable, and more importantly, aggravating. Downing the rest of his drink, Pete rose to his feet, now feeling the aches in his muscles from the effort exerted while dragging that thing all the way home from the hill. Walking over to the tree, the lights were indeed flickering, but there was something unusual about them. They seemed deeper than the rest, as if coming from around the trunk, rather than resting on the branches. Again, Pete was struck by how dark the interior of the tree was, that even in the presence of many lights placed upon it, he could not peer or adequately see between the branches. Even the two lights which sat deeper behind the pines did not seem to illuminate their surroundings in any way. The empty glass slipped from his fingers, smashing on the floor. The lights were fine, they were not flickering at all, but the occasional blinking of two eyes amongst the branches had been enough to catch his attention. He froze to the spot, and it was as if the room grew somehow darker. Something stirred between the pines, between the knotted wood and the scratched porous surface. Something lived there. A feeling of utter paralysis now took hold, his feet firmly glued to the ground as the two eyes slowly pushed forward. Creaking and cracking, a face revealed itself from between the pine-covered branches, as if seeping out from its innermost visceral point. Mold-covered, ancient, its features twisted in rage. Fear began to course through Pete's veins. His heart beat faster and faster as the face moved closer, its eyes devoid of pupils now swamped in a maddening yellow, and from below, the protrusion of two thin, moss-covered legs arching out from between the branches. With a creak and snap, it straightened itself now, standing in all of its terrible glory in front of the tree. It was now pitch black outside, and it would have been clear to Pete that this animal, this creature, was of a nocturnal nature. But in its stare, he found himself helpless. His heart skipped. First it was a palpitation. Then he could feel a searing pain in his left arm. He clutched his chest, but his feet remained adhered to the ground, and it was impossible to look away from those yellow, unmarked eyes. Its gaze came closer still, and in the pain which it brought, Pete knew he was going to die, to be found like Janet, cold, face contorted, and the second victim of that which lived amongst the pines on that hill. The pain was now unbearable, but the paralysis removed the possibility of a scream. What little light there was from the fireplace now illuminated its head, elongated on one side and pulsating on the other, its face dominated by a large dark hole which appeared in place of a mouth or nose, one which no light could penetrate. As its boil-ridden head stooped to meet his own, and the hole in its face almost touched his mouth, an involuntary sneer pulled Pete's lips up to reveal his teeth as his face contorted into an entirely unnatural position. Then that one word. A word so powerful, so pure, that even the most evil of intentions could be dispelled by it. Daddy. With the snap of wood, the gargoyle-like creature turned its wide yellow gaze to Lana. Standing at the bottom of the stairs in her pajamas, her scream echoed out into the night. Arms outstretched, its odd-numbered fingers moved with a stutter as its moss-covered legs groaned, carrying it forward in a peculiar, unbalanced motion towards her. Now Lana was paralyzed by its stare, and with each step closer, her face contorted more fiercely, and the pain in her chest brought her to the point of unconsciousness. As intense as its ancient gaze was, it was focused. So focused that it did notice Pete clawing his way across the floor towards the kitchen. The wooden creature's unsure movements made it appear more like a puppet than a thing of autonomous purpose, and as it reached Lana, it cupped her face in its uneven hands and stared wide-eyed and pupilless into her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks as the sound of feet running filled the air, and as it twisted to investigate, a loud crack was heard as Pete ran up onto the couch, jumping high into the air, bringing Janet's axe down deep into its spine. No blood ran or gushed, but a plague of unfamiliar insect-like critters poured out of the wound. Instead of a howl of pain, the creature emitted a crescendo of strange squeals and clicks before throwing Pete to the ground and smashing through the back door. Lana's father gave chase, but it was impossible, as the wooden creation moved at an unimaginable pace, gliding on the ground with each stride, leaving no footprints in the snow. After a visit to the nearest hospital, both Lana and her father were given a clean bill of health, but they never returned to that house, filled with memories of the good times, the happy times, of a mother, a wife, a kind soul, of birthdays and weddings, and of course of Christmas time. Pete didn't know what that creature was, whether it was alive or dead, or something else entirely inconceivable to human mind, but he made a solemn promise to himself from that moment on. Never again would he cut down a tree, decorate it, and take enjoyment in its appearance as it died, because no matter how pretty they are, no matter how much warmth they may give, no matter how much they might make people think of Christmas, you just don't know what may be living inside.